So hi everyone, my name is Beverly Salisbury. I'm a director at People in Law. I'm also the HR director at Ropes and Grace. Before we begin, I just want to let everyone know that the session is being recorded. So we can send it to you afterwards, and then we can send it on to our peers who can attend today. So as most of you know, People in Law is a network that aims to advance people management across the legal sector. So when Becky and Rob came to me for my input and support in some research that they wanted to explore about how law firms are using data to measure and improve the effectiveness of HR, I was really keen to be involved. So we're always asking ourselves, what data should we collect and analyse to help make decisions? And so we're really keen to hear what the law firms do. And so thank you so much for participating. Your input has been really helpful, and we really appreciate you taking the time to complete the survey, especially at the moment when law firms are busier than ever with deal flow as well as dealing with the pandemic, etc. So thank you. At the end of the session, I'm going to announce the winner of the People in Law Award tickets that we promised to one of you for kindly filling out the survey. So stay tuned to the end when the draw will take place. And I'm presenting today with Becky Statham, who I'll hand over to you now and to say hi and outline our agenda for the session.
Thanks, Beverly. Morning, everyone. To echo Beverly's comment as well, thank you, huge thank you for participating in the survey. It means a lot, and we've got lots of stuff to share with you today. So for anyone who I haven't met before, I'm Becky Statham, and I'm an HR data and technology advisor at Veran Performance. So I work with lots of law firms to improve their HR data processes and systems. And about a year ago, I mean, as if it's been a year already, Rob Hind, who is our friend and also the chair of People in Law, he asked us if we wanted to collaborate with him and MHR. MHR is a business that Rob advises and advocates, and MHR provide HR and payroll software like iTrent, which some of you may know, and also People First. And they also provide HR and payroll outsourcing services across all sectors, but they're particularly popular in the legal sector. And Rob basically had two observations. So he found that lots of law firms that he spoke to didn't realize that there were consultancies like Veran that were independent and that work with law firms to improve their HR data, processes, technology, and culture. And he also thought that it would be useful for People in Law members to know that. And his second observation was that law firms were changing what they were reporting on and how they were working because of things like Black Lives Matter and also the pandemic. And he was being asked, what are the other law firms doing? How are they adapting? And at the same time, Veran were running webinars every week with various HR leaders from different businesses, including the HR director of Norton Rose Fulbright. We spoke to the head of culture and comms at Slater and Gordon, the associate director of Osborne Clarke, and we were talking about exactly these topics. So we came together as a trio, MHR, People in Law, and Veran, to run this research and to share some of that information with our network. So we really wanted to share Veran's knowledge of leading practice metrics and also see how reporting in law firms had changed in recent years. So we created this survey, which you've all kindly filled out, and it listed all of the good practice metrics for 8 areas of people management. And then we asked you which metrics you report on and which ones go to senior leadership. I'm basically living on a building site, so I'm really sorry if you can hear banging and all sorts of things. I apologise. There's some people putting stuff in my hallway as well, because I've told them just to let themselves in and put the stuff in if I'm on a call. So apologies, the joys of working from home. So in a couple of weeks, you will all get a full report. So we've compacted our key findings into an hour today, but in a few weeks, we'll be sending out the report, and that will have all of the metrics, all of the data, and all the information in it, and cover all 8 topics. But today we're just going to cover a few, and really we've got 2 aims. So the first aim is to inspire you, to inspire law firms to think beyond what the SRA require you to report on, and to move towards other metrics and data that maybe outside of the legal sector are being used to solve business problems and to help you to meet your goals. And the second aim is to help you to benchmark your firm against others. So it's quite useful for you to know that you're reporting on the same thing as others, but also see what you're not reporting on that maybe your peers are, and that might give you some ideas for things that you want to report on. So I really like teaching people something new. That's kind of my overall aim for all of these. So I've put a light bulb on the slide where I think that we're giving kind of a practical tip. So hopefully that will signpost something that you can think about or add to your roadmap. So on the next slide, I've got the topics that we're going to cover. We'll do a little introduction to HR data and the tools used for that generally. Talk about D&I, which is a big hot topic, engagement, well-being, and then we've put retention and attrition together. And what we'll do is we'll talk a little bit about what the data showed in the survey, and I'll talk about our recommendation based on leading practice. And then I'm going to invite Beverly to talk about what Ropes and Gray are doing, and also some of the practical tips that you can think about building into your roadmap. Please send us comments, questions. If you want to have a chat with us, we would love that. So raise your hand and we can unmute you. You can have a chat. It doesn't have to be typed out. You know, we're here to answer your questions. So if you've got comments and questions, feedback, anything, let us know as we go through and we'll answer them. Good. So first topic, data. So on the next slide, I've got all of the tools that you've told us you use to analyze and visualize data. And the bigger the logo, the more popular. So you won't be surprised to know that over half of the firms we spoke to are manipulating data in Excel and then presenting it using PowerPoint. It's manual, it's error prone, and it takes anywhere between 3 and 20 days for the HR team to pull that data together and create these reports. Ideally, you'd use your HR system to produce these reports, right? In an ideal world, your HR system churns out and visualizes all the data that you need. And there are some firms that do this. So we've got really positive feedback about Cascade and also iTrent by MHR. So these tools seem to be flexible enough for people to create the reports that they need. However, there are firms with much bigger tools, like things like PeopleSoft and some of the older systems, OpenHR, where they're having to export data out of those systems, do a whole load of manual manipulation to get it where they want it, to meet the requirements of the SRA and the business. So what we'll do on the next slide is look at some recommendations and observations. And Beverly, I'll start with your thoughts.
Yeah, well, I have to say, Becky, I was one of those people that have spent days of my time over the years analysing raw diversity data. It doesn't surprise me that the statistics have come out that most firms are heavily reliant on Excel, because that's what I've used for years. And then, of course, you use Excel to not only view the document, but then, of course, you can present it in a sort of aesthetically pleasing way. I would say, however, even though Excel has got pivot tables and pie charts where you present it, I'm not sure that most HR people have had the skill set to use the advanced skills or functionality in Excel. So getting yourself in a training course of advanced Excel skills is always a good idea. But the big thing is, what I would say, is leverage off your internal resources. So typically finance teams have members of their team that have got advanced Excel skills. And of course, these days, firms are even having dedicated data or people analytics teams within their organisation. So, for example, at Ropes and Gray, we've got the HRIS team, so the systems team, HR systems team. But then in finance, we've got a strategic analysis team, and I've been working with them on producing a diversity dashboard, which I'm going to talk about later. So definitely leverage off internal resources. And then the other thing, of course, as you've got on the slide, there are external providers out there who offer specialist reporting services. So including our friends at Pericol and at OrgView. Those of you who are members of People in Law will be familiar with Jason Mew of Pericol, who has presented at People Law events in the past. And finally, I would say, on the HR data, typically, I think most firms have collated data, but I don't think they've necessarily been very good at using that data to make decisions. And that's something that I think all firms are focusing on now, particularly because, as most things, firms are driven by something. And at the moment, the Black Lives Matter movement forced firms to report better on Diversity Reporter and implement quotas and targets in some cases, or in fact, for example, the gender pay gap legislation meant that firms had to start reporting in gender statistics.
Perfect, thanks Beverly. SQL is the other one that's really useful to learn. So if you're on something like OpenHR, which is a legacy system that quite a lot of the law firms are on, that's based on a SQL database. So learning SQL or having someone in the team learn SQL is really useful for pulling data out and doing hours worth of manual manipulation in a few seconds. And you could schedule that every week or every month or every quarter. The other observation that we made was that some of the firms that we surveyed have tools like Power BI and SAP Business Objects elsewhere in the business, so perhaps in finance, but they're not used in HR. So if you've got those kinds of tools in the business, it's really useful to have a quick demo of that and even send, you know, some of those manual and time-consuming reports that you create and see if the BI or the reporting team could produce that quicker for you. So let's go on to the first meaty topic, which is diversity and inclusion. So before we go into the metrics, I just wanted to reflect really on the fact that over the past few years, and particularly since Black Lives Matter, all law firms have increased their reporting on diversity and inclusion. And we've got really positive results to share in terms of how many firms are reporting on different D&I metrics. But I'm thinking that there's almost 3 stages to diversity and inclusion reporting. And I think that, like most sectors, the legal sector are in that first stage. So the first stage is looking at the diversity of the existing workforce and the people applying for those jobs and getting jobs in the firm. I think the second stage, which we're not at yet, is looking at how well we include those people and support those people once they're in the firm. And then the third stage, which I don't think we're near yet, is correlating that diversity and inclusion data to how the business is performing. And that's where you get the real, you know, the real power of we've got more diverse thinking, we've got more diverse people, more diverse teams, and therefore we're doing better as a business. So I think that's kind of where we should aim towards. So on the next slide, we will look at that first stage. So step 1 out of 3 is reporting on the diversity of the current people in the business and people applying. So ethnicity, gender identity, LGBTQ, and also the number of carers in the organisation. That's reported on by over 70% of firms. Underreported is physical and mental accessibility. So I suspect that you record that information anyway, so that you can support those people with any requirements that they've got. But at the moment, it's not, you know, it's not reported up to senior leadership. So it's maybe not a need right now. I think possibly because it's not required by the SRA, Beverly.
Yeah, I think exactly that. Most of those statistics on there are mandatory SRA requirements to put reporting metrics in their survey. So it doesn't surprise me that ethnicity and gender and LGBTQ and carers actually are on the top reporting metrics.
And the interesting observation as well about D&I is, out of the 8 topics that we asked you about, D&I is the only area where if it's reported on by the firm, it goes to senior leadership. So it just shows that it's really important. So if you're reporting on that at all, it goes to senior leadership. Whereas for most other areas, you might report on it, but it doesn't necessarily influence that senior decision-making group. So now on the next slide, we'll talk a bit about what we do with some of this D&I data, Beverly.
Sure. So these are just some examples of where that we use diversity data. So of course it's to measure progress, or to take a snapshot and measure progress. So it's really important. It provides that window into the makeup of the business. It can provide a baseline to understand where you're at. And then if you track and progress and monitor those statistics, it could signal where initiatives are succeeding or perhaps where efforts might be focused to make better future outcomes. And of course, it can also be used to drive accountability. So at Ropes & Gray, we use data to tell a story. We have great gender diversity at our firm, and so we use our gender statistics to showcase this success. We also have diversity statistics to show our ethnically diverse populations, which in our case is, I think, the same as the industry average. So that shows that we have more to do in this area. Obviously, some firms have gone as far as to set quotas, and So of course you need to collect and monitor that data so then you can report on the progress to make sure that you've met those targets. I would also say that clients are putting real pressure on law firms these days to provide evidence that they are using diverse deal teams in their transactions. There's also now large sections within a pitch document about diversity inclusion efforts. So it's really important to be able to demonstrate and provide clients and prospective clients with the detail that they're looking for in this area. One of our main priorities at the moment is we've been building a diversity dashboard for work allocation. And so we have a dashboard. It shows billable hours for ethnically diverse and LGBT key associates against the practice group average. And I think it's shown by way of a heat map. So that's something that we've been focusing on at the moment. We've also been, we've set an objective for ourselves about achieving cultural competence. And that includes introducing metrics to encourage and evolve our culture. One of the things, like some of the firms that have been reported in the press, we've introduced diversity hours. So any lawyer now working on eligible diversity efforts, they will have that time recorded as and reflected as chargeable hours. We've actually done that for a number of years now for legal pro bono work, and it works. It's been really effective. And on the business support side of the house, we have updated our appraisal form to ask individuals to provide examples of where they have worked and demonstrated commitment to firm citizen, would call it, but it includes diversity efforts. So this might be being on a diversity committee or championing diversity efforts, being part of recruitment, for example, or being a mentor. And so now going forward, we can start measuring the contribution that people have been making and report on that. I know the firm's put a number of metrics in place for partners to make sure that partners are being held accountable for our D&I initiatives and efforts, particularly if they're in a management role, like a practice group leader role. We're improving our attrition reporting to see why people are leaving and monitoring trends within diverse populations. The other thing that I would say as well, and I think lots of people use Apply for Law for their graduate recruitment. I think that came out on the statistics as well, Becky. They've always had a really good D&I reporting tool as part of that product. And so we've always used that to track diverse candidates from application process all the way through the system to offer stage. And then finally, I would comment in using data and diversity data. One of the great success stories is the contextual recruitment tool used by Rare Recruitment or produced by Rare Recruitment. Again, another friend of people in law. And for those of you that don't know, Rare basically gives an employer a deeper insight into candidates to allow them to make better decisions about that candidate's candidacy. So it's, the outcome of that is that it's allowed a high number of social mobility students to progress further through an application process and a recruitment process, even through to offer stage, where they may not have done before. And that's all down to the use of the power of data. Rare have also put together a race commitment charter that people might want to have a look at, and they've set out what you might want to record and how and what formula to use. So I would take a look at that if you are not aware of it already.
I'm on mute still. Perfect. So much stuff. Thank you, Beverly. I thought that was really interesting, actually, because you were talking then about client expectations and how actually having a diverse team can help you to win work. So that's step 3, you know, in that model. That's relating D&I to revenue and client, client satisfaction. So that's really good. And then I just wanted to reflect on that last point around self-classified gender. So most of the law firms that we surveyed and that I'm working with are recording self-classified gender, and they're using a custom field in the HR system. So at the moment, you know, your payroll system will track male or female for tax purposes. But even in the most modern HR systems, you are having to create that custom field at the moment, just as a note. And then I think, with all of this diversity and inclusion data, the other thing that some of the law firms are thinking about is, changing the office environment and the working style to cater for a more diverse group. So companies like Baker and McKenzie, I know that they've got gender neutral toilets in their London office, and lots of other law firms are following. So it's thinking about, you've got that data now, what do you do with that? And so on the next step, we're going to talk about that a bit more, so about inclusion. So step 2 in that 3-step process is then looking at how well we include and support people of different diverse backgrounds and characteristics. And I think that this is best done by correlating the diversity data that you've got with other information that you already have. So if we look at training, wellbeing, progression, attrition, this is data that you already report on throughout the employee life cycle, but it's correlating that with your diversity data. So less than 10% of firms that we surveyed report on training uptake in diversity groups. But this, again, is just a combination of 2 data sets you've already got. So other research and literature shows us that in the firms who do report on training uptake in various different groups, there is a difference, for example, between the training done in BAME groups compared to white counterparts. So it could be that line managers and mentors have a role to play in encouraging, various people, everyone, to take advantage of training, seeing as that's an expense for most firms, a big expense. Wellbeing, so only 5% of firms look at wellbeing in minority groups or correlated to D&I. And Beverly, I think you touched on it later, but there's lots of research out there to show that wellbeing is more of a concern in some of these groups than others. So I think that would be something worth reporting on. And then on progression, reporting on the diversity of people who get salary increases, who get bonuses, who get promotions. At the moment, the firms that we spoke to are doing this just to meet the minimum requirement of gender pay gap reporting. But it's such a manual and time-consuming exercise that it kind of takes away from the overall mission, the aim of gender pay gap reporting and diversity pay reporting, which is to narrow that gap, not just in gender, but also other characteristics that we are already reporting on. Most firms moving to new cloud systems are actually building gender pay gap and diversity and inclusion reporting into those reports so that you can schedule them and just make that manual effort a bit less. And then you can actually sit back and look at the data and figure out what you want to do with D&I linked to progression. And then the last point on attrition, so 27% of the firms that we surveyed report on turnover of employees in ethnic minority groups. So there's been lots of research into this. So Allen and Overy, they said last year that Black lawyers left their London office 2.5 years before their white peers. And so they've pledged to publish an annual stay gap to improve the staff diversity. So you've got D&I data and you've got leaver data. So combining the two and using things like exit surveys would be really useful to see if there's anything that you should be doing differently, I think. Beverly, anything that you want to add on that?
Yeah, no, there's some great ideas there, Becky. Just one example, or a couple of examples I've got. I mentioned where we're linking diversity data to sort of talent and HR processes. So I mentioned earlier we're putting together a diversity dashboard. So what that is we're taking integrating diversity data into our staffing system to ensure fair allocation of work. And so it's really important to integrate your D&I metrics into your talent processes to get that, to tell that full story, you get the full picture. So for example, you may have actually quite a relatively good ethnic representation in your workforce, but that doesn't tell the full picture, because then you need to look at those stats alongside talent initiatives such as the work allocation or secondment opportunities or promotion opportunities, because if the diverse associates are not getting those opportunities, then when you look at your attrition reports, you might notice that there's a correlation between higher ethnicity minorities in your attrition reporting, because they're not getting the opportunity. So it's really good to have that holistic overview and look at different diversity and link different diversity and data sets together.
Perfect, thank you. So let's go to wellbeing next, now that we've done lots on D&I. So we had a really interesting conversation about this, didn't we? Because I said to Beverly, from the outside, from outside of the legal sector looking in, it feels like, you know, well-being is not a priority. But Beverly corrected me and said that actually it is moving up on the agenda, especially mental health. So this slide shows good practice wellbeing metrics across all industries. And then on the right, we've got the percentage of firms that we surveyed who report on that metric. So 80% of firms report on absenteeism and long-term sick. So you really care about people being in work, and you use that as an indication if people are not well, to measure well-being. 78% report on the number of mental health first aiders. So Beverly will talk more about that, and I was really interested to learn about that initiative, which is relatively recent. Those measures in the middle that are in white, so these could be reported on more. Absence reasons and occurrences could be worth adding to your wellbeing reporting. They're certainly more popular than things like the Bradford factor. So only 17% of firms are reporting on the Bradford factor now. And actually, as an alternative to the Bradford factor, there's a couple of measures on the bottom right here. So lost time rate is something used by some firms. So this is hours lost divided by the number of potential hours that you can have. Or there's things like frequency rate. So this is looking at the number of absence spells that you've got. Only 17% of law firms report on mood or happiness. So this is quite a new concept, to be fair. You know, if you go to the CIPD conferences and other HR leadership conferences, it's a relatively new concept. But, you know, there are lots of really good tools out there that report on mood and happiness, and also that show you report well-being related absence over time. So some of the tools that we really like are the happiness index, for example. So Veran uses the happiness index, which is always on. So it's just it's a link in the browser that you can go to anytime, and you can say how you're feeling and give anonymous feedback. And the tool uses machine learning and cognitive neuroscience to help you to improve well-being and engagement. And it's really cost effective. So, you know, we've got a range of law firms on the call. Some are smaller, some are bigger. And actually, we are using a free trial. I did check that they don't mind me saying that, because they felt that during lockdown, people's well-being was probably impacted in a range of ways. And so they were offering a free trial to businesses to test it out, really, and to see what the impact of the pandemic has had on well-being. So Beverly, can you share your ideas and thoughts for well-being?
Sure, I really like the thought of the happiness index. I'm going to look into that myself. So looking at these statistics, so, you know, it doesn't surprise me absenteeism and long-term sickness are high on the responses, because of course they've been the traditional sort of well-being metrics for a long time. It's also unsurprising to me that the Bradford factor is not reported anymore, because it's not as prevalent these days. It's certainly something back in the day I remember reporting on. And yeah, as you say, at the top of this section, so well-being has really evolved over the last few years in the legal sector. And I think many firms now have a pretty comprehensive wellbeing program. I know that we do at Ropes and Gray. We've got a huge established global wellbeing program now built around 3 pillars. There's financial wellbeing, mental wellbeing, and physical wellbeing. And we are constantly promoting resources. We run various sessions and seminars to help our lawyers and business support professionals not only survive but thrive in their careers. And we really value and set about creating a wellbeing culture. The one thing I would say that I think it's quite hard, or harder certainly than some other areas, to measure the impact of wellbeing initiatives. So, you know, I'd be interested to learn what other metrics people are going to be using to measure the effectiveness. I noticed that 78% of people report on mental health first aiders, which is great. I assume that's because they know how many mental health first aiders they have. For people on the call that don't know about mental health first aiders, they're akin to like the St. John's ambulance first aiders, so physical first aiders, but Mental Health England have put together a training program for mental health first aiders. It's a 2-day program, very intense, and then, you know, learn a lot about mental health. So we have, I think we've got about 10 people at the moment, 10 or 12 people across the business, both in professional service, business support and on the employer and, associate and partner side, that have been trained, have been embedded into the business, so they can support people, and they can be on the ground to support people with any mental health conditions that they may have, got someone to talk to, they can flag to HR. Again, they're just new in Ropes and Grey, or relatively new, that we rolled out this year. So again, we haven't got a lot of data to support how effective they are. Again, it's quite difficult to measure that effectiveness, so we're tending to do it anecdotally. So we meet with the first aiders on a regular basis to find out, you know, how many people have approached them, the type of things that they're approaching them about. We're also making sure that the mental health first aiders are okay and not too burdened. And so I really do hope that they're going to have a positive impact on their colleagues, and certainly that their colleagues feel supported. You mentioned, you know, in our discussions, it doesn't surprise me that wellbeing in minority groups is only 6% of respondents report on that. I think that this might change in the future, because certainly, again, we're doing a lot about intersectionality at the moment. And so that's where looking at not only mental health within the workplace, but also mental health within minority groups, because the statistics show that Black and ethnic minorities and those in the LGBTQ plus communities suffer from mental health issues more than their white counterparts. And so, yes, there is definitely, I would say, Becky, a huge push on implementing wellbeing strategies in law firms in recent years. And so now the focus is going to be how to measure the effectiveness of those strategies and the impact on engagement and productivity, absence levels, performance, etc.
Mm. And actually, you know, what I wrote down when you were talking about D&I earlier and client expectations, and then again linking, you know, well-being to D&I, is, you know, wouldn't it be nice if you could report above and beyond what your clients or potential clients were asking for? You know, I think that would be an advantage. In what looks like good news, in 2019, 90% of survey respondents said that their stress and mental health issues were due to problems at work. So a couple of years ago, 90% of stress and mental health issues were due to problems at work. Last year, maybe with that move to home working, that number dropped to 64%. So lockdown seems to have reduced stress and mental health issues for lawyers. So should we return to the office, and how's that going to work? We get asked about this a lot. Most law firms, you know, Linklaters have published theirs recently, are updating their flexible working policies globally. So giving people the opportunity to work remotely, you know, for up to 20 or 50 or even more % of the time, as long as they let their teams know in advance. You know, we did an interview with Kevin Hogarth, who was the head of people and culture at Norton Rose Fulbright just before he left last year. And they said that they did a survey, basically. So instead of guessing what people wanted, they did a survey to find out what kind of working arrangements and patterns people wanted moving forwards, and found that people wanted to work from home between 1 and 4 days a week. So they're making that kind of flexible policy. But, you know, I think you've had a different observation, and I've seen the same as well, Beverly. What do you think about returning to the office?
Yeah, so it's interesting to see those statistics have reduced stress, because I would say that actually, and I'm sure there is less stress, or perhaps there's less stress brought about by not having to commute anymore, or not having to rush to collect the kids from childcare, etc. But what is being reported quite significantly in the press is burnout whilst working from home. Many firms are reporting, or certainly in the press, there's anecdotal evidence reporting that because of the lack of boundaries at home, or the isolation that people experience, then this is leading to burnout and impacting on people's well-being and mental health. One of the things that struck me actually when I was speaking to one of our mental health first aiders the other day, she said to me, Beverly, when you're if you're a transactional lawyer, you're having to work long hours and sometimes late, and it can be stressful, etc. But she said, when you're in the office, you have your colleagues there to help you and get you through. So there's like huge camaraderie. You're in the trenches together, and you get each other through. Now, of course, when people are at home, you just can't replicate that in-person support when you're at home. Again, you're having to work late. You're by yourself. You just can't, as I said, you can't replicate that, and that's one of the reasons why people are struggling, because they're by themselves and lacking the support of their colleagues. So it doesn't surprise me to hear that actually there's a cohort of lawyers wanting to come back to the office, albeit I appreciate not on a full-time basis, but certainly people want to achieve this hybrid model of the benefits of working from home, but also the benefits of being in an office with their colleagues.
I mean, I'm certainly sick of it. I can't wait to get back. I'm going into the office on Friday because it's becoming unbearable. But what we heard across all of the law firms that we spoke to was that productivity had gone up. So everyone was like, "This is brilliant." Our lawyers are logging more time because they're doing it at the end of every day rather than running for the train or going to the pub, and they're getting more work done. And I certainly am getting so much more work done. But is that a good thing? Is being super productive always the best thing? There has to be a balance. And I think hopefully as lockdown, opens us back up over the next few months, we'll restore a bit of balance, because I think it's possibly gone a bit too far the other way. So very closely linked to well-being, let's talk about our penultimate topic, which is engagement. So on the next slide, we've got a snapshot of the leading practice engagement metrics that we recommend, and how many law firms report on them. So you'll notice that there aren't any engagement metrics in that nice turquoisey teal colour, and that's because none of the engagement metrics that we listed really were reported on by more than about 70% of firms. So 6% of the firms that we spoke to report on Glassdoor ratings. So it might be that you're not reporting on it, but maybe you do have a look. I'd be interested if anyone on the call looks at Glassdoor. And I certainly know that our potential clients, if we're bidding for a piece of work, let's say a HR transformation or a HR technology project, and we're bidding for that, I know that our potential clients look at our Glassdoor. And they want to know what kind of business we are, and they do that with other partners as well when they're looking for technology partners or suppliers or service suppliers. They look at their Glassdoor. So I think this is a really interesting and publicly available set of data that we should be looking at. And also it's reviewed by all of the trainees who are choosing which law firms to apply to. So from a recruitment perspective, I think it's really useful as well. 0%, so we've got a nil point, no firms at all report on Net Promoter Score. And this is a really popular metric in other sectors. So in property, recruitment, high sales businesses, they use this metric a lot. And it's essentially one question which is asked to employees, and that's, would you recommend us as an employer? So we've included staff advocacy in there as well, because this is a similar thing. So would you recommend us as an employer? It's one question, and really it's quite telling. So 75% of the firms that we spoke to, they report on the source of hire. So they're really trying to increase the number of people that come into the firm by recommendations or referrals, and trying to reduce that spend on agencies. So if you know whether your employers would recommend you or not to their friends, their network, and if not, why not? That's really useful information. Less than. Go on.
Sorry, go on, Becky. I was just about to say, I think actually we do ask that question in our engagement survey, but I don't think we would have known it was called Net Promoter Score. So I've learned something today.
It's quite a salesy term, I think. I think it was sales, marketing, recruitment kind of businesses use it a lot, but it's a good metric.
Good to know.
Less than 60%, so 59% of the firms that we spoke to report on engagement survey scores, so self-reported engagement that people give either in their annual surveys or pulse surveys. And I think that this is lower probably than industries outside of the legal sector. Good practice at the moment and the movement over the past few years is these pulse surveys, regular surveys, whether it's, you know, I know that Workday have Feedback Friday, for example, where they can give feedback about the business or to their colleagues. You know, the happiness index, which I mentioned before, that's always on. So you can just nip in and add feedback anytime, which at the moment is really good because things change so quickly. And also it means that people can just add things as they think of them. You know, they don't have to fill out a whole survey. They can just say, oh, it'd be really good if we had that, and just pop that into the survey. There are other tools that are really good. So Peakon has really good reviews, and also Qualtrics, especially if you're an SAP customer, because SAP bought Qualtrics, I believe, or they provide Qualtrics. There's also research that shows that partners are the most engaged. So this may or may not be true in your firm, followed by trainees. So the trainees are getting all this investment, you know, getting lots of love and attention. Then business support. So business support engagement's not great. I think it's around kind of 50%. And the least engaged group of people are associates. So if you ran this assessment and you reported on engagement in those different groups, you might find that associates, for example, have lower engagement, and you might want to spend a bit more time and maybe think about initiatives that you can use to engage that group once you've, you know, invested so much time in their training. So as with all of these metrics, it's really important to think about why we're reporting on engagement. So we don't need to report on engagement for the sake of it. It's generally to meet a business goal or to solve a problem. And data shows that engagement drives productivity, it improves client satisfaction, which in turn increases revenue, and also it increases retention, which reduces your people costs. So there's some really good reasons to report on engagement. And so once you've mastered some of these metrics, if you take a couple that you like the look of, you could then correlate that with, you know, productivity and revenue and things like that, because the link is quite well documented across other sectors. Beverly, what do you think?
Yeah, I think this is an area where firms could do a lot more. I mean, there's been the traditional interventions of engagement surveys, but they've been done like annually or every other year. There's been employee committees that I've you know, been on many again across my career. But I think these days firms need to do a lot more around engagement. I'm a big fan of pulse surveys. As we actually only do an engagement survey every other year, and I don't think it's frequent enough these days. You know, the world is agile, it's volatile, it's changing all the time, and you know, firms need to be able to check the temperature of what's going on and to respond much more quickly, I think. So definitely a need to evolve from the traditional engagement methods to more regular pulse surveys to get more real-time data. I think the other thing that people need to appreciate is there are lots of different generations in the workplace now. So you've got millennials and Generation Z and X and Y, and all will have different views on everything in the workplace. So technology, flexibility, you know, working patterns, benefits, you know, where they work from. So I don't think you can have a one-size-fits-all approach anymore. I also don't think you can second-guess what people think. I think you really need to engage with your workforce and different demographics within your workforce to really understand what they want. I think engagement is also really important so that they, your employees feel that they are informing the experience. And if you say that, you know, that you get much more engagement, which drives productivity and employee satisfaction if you engage with people. A couple of other things on these statistics, which I find interesting. Again, it doesn't surprise me that there's only 18% of respondents measure manager effectiveness. I think that's something that firms need to do much better at. You know, the statistics show that a high percentage of people leave firms because of their line manager. And so I think that monitoring manager effectiveness should be much higher. Whether that's through pulse surveys, feedback surveys, etc. Again, managers play a really important role in diversity inclusion as well. And again, I think they should be held accountable through some sort of manager effectiveness monitoring. And then the other thing, again, I'm not surprised that Glassdoor is so low, but again, I think that firms need to focus more on their external brand and reputation, because candidates are really looking at these external measures now in terms of understanding what it's like to work at a firm. So, what better way to understand what a firm culture is really like than by asking the people that work there. And so, the Roll on Friday survey that's done now, I think people are taking really seriously about, firm satisfaction. And there's the True Picture survey for the Chambers Directory that asks trainees what the true picture is of working at that firm. I think prospective candidates really look to these measures now, and firms should take these more seriously.
We had a couple of people on the chat saying that they look at Glassdoor, so that's good.
Good.
So our last topic is attrition and retention together. So these are two sides of a coin, so we put these together. And 50% of firms report on overall retention. So I was thinking, oh, okay, so law firms aren't that bothered about who stays and for how long. But 90% report on turnover in trainees. So we know that it's really important to law firms to retain those trainees. 22% report on new joiners who leave in the first 90 days. So I certainly know lots of businesses outside of the legal sector who report on this and who report on people that leave in the first 6 months or the first year. It's a really good metric to report on the first 90 days, because you've got that data already. So it wouldn't be extra data to collect. You already know when people are leaving and how long they've been with the business. But it would show you if you had any issues in your recruitment process, for example, or your onboarding process. So are expectations not being set or met? And so I think this is a relatively easy one to potentially look at. And just, it might be that you look at it and you're like, we've got no issue, in which case that's good. And then equally, 22% of firms report on the cost of employee turnover, so the cost of people leaving. So this can be really expensive. We've built business cases for new HR systems, the transformation of processes, shared services or not shared services. We've built lots of cases for investment on this cost, because it can be a lot, right? It's quite difficult to calculate, and I think that's why firms maybe don't report on it. But a charity that we worked with last year, they were losing over £1 million every year, which was huge for this charity based in the UK. And a lot of it was preventable. So that really helped them then to justify, improvement of processes, etc. So attrition costs, these can be based on different calculations. One of the ones that we use is looking at this formula that's on the slide. So we look at the direct costs for advertising the role. So if you think about, whether it's on Milk Round or, whichever website that you're using, plus any recruitment events that you might be running, and then also recruitment agency fees, so your kind of direct costs. Then we look at how many days are spent from different colleagues in recruitment or hiring managers, HR, to recruit and onboard somebody. We take the estimated benchmarked or the estimated or benchmark salary of those roles, and we times it by 1.75, because you've got to account for the tax and national insurance overheads. It's a big cost, and then you divide that by, I know I'm going on a bit, you divide that by the number of working days in the year, which we calculate at about 220. So you get quite a big cost, which is the effort that it takes all of those different people to recruit and onboard that person. And then we look at cost of productivity. So we look at how long it takes for somebody to either be cost neutral or to be generating revenue for the firm, and times that by their loaded salary. So that's kind of one way that you can look at the cost of losing somebody, basically. And you might do that across fee earners, trainees, business support, or you might just have an average for the firm. But if you take that and you look at the number of leavers that you have, or even the number of leavers in the first year or 90 days, it can rack up to quite a lot. And if you want to, you can then decide that, you know, you're okay with that, or it might be that you want to invest in, you know, better kind of retention schemes, and that might include wellbeing and engagement initiatives that we've talked about on those previous slides. Beverly, what do you think about retention and nutrition?
Yeah, I mean, again, looking at statistics, it's unsurprising that trainee retention and turnover in trainees is high, because it's reported to the legal press every 6 months. Again, I think that, you know, the legal industry is so competitive nowadays. Firms cannot be complacent and just rely on their brand. They have to, it's very much about the employee experience and culture. So I would definitely be monitoring, you know, why people are staying and why people are leaving. Another reason for leaving is reported on by 84% of firms, which again is unsurprising. But one of the things that I wanted to mention that I'd heard about recently is the concept of stay interviews. So rather than exit interviews, have conversations with your team, whether it's through the appraisal process or just your regular catch up with your team meetings, and ask them, you know, are they happy? You know, what is it about the firm that they like, and why do they stay? And then also, if they were going to leave, what would be the reason? And so I really like that idea, because it's much easier to mitigate any flight risks at that stage when they're still an employee, rather than where obviously the stage that the horse is bolted and they've already made the decision to leave the firm. And so I found that new concept very, very interesting. It surprises me that the number of new hires is quite low, because again, that's a key metric that's always reported when talking about how valuable a good and effective induction process is. And again, as I mentioned before, I think manager effectiveness and monitoring that through certainly attrition reporting is really important, because as we said, people leave typically because of the relationship with their line manager. So I think it's interesting to monitor and find out if there are any issues there. And again, you know, there's a lot more focus, as I said, on an external brand and reputation. So again, understanding why people are leaving the firm gets a much better understanding of what it's like to work there, and if there are any issues to address.
Perfect, thank you. I just had to get my phone, tell them to come back at 12 and come back. You know, there's people banging on the door and I'm like, God, come back. So I think that brings us to the end. I'm just going to see if there's any questions. There was a question, Beverly, around your people analytics team. Do you know what tool they're using? Are they using something that was in the business already, or have they gone out and bought something?
Yes, I think we are a firm that tends to design our own bespoke programs and systems. We certainly use PeopleSoft as our global HR database, and so we use that heavily. But then I know that yeah, exactly. And then the strategic and analytics and analysis team that I mentioned have their own systems that they design. I know at the moment we're contemplating on whether we're buying an off-the-shelf staff allocation product versus having something that we build. But most law firms, as you know, tend to do that because it's to customize it to how they operate rather than getting something off the shelf. But yes, typically internal bespoke systems, I think.
And then we had a question about HR technology spend. So this is interesting. I didn't include this today because it was such a mixed picture. So we asked everyone how much they spend on HR technology, and we didn't specify whether that includes payroll technology or learning technology, recruitment systems. You know, we just asked the open question. And we got a real range. So people are spending anywhere between £40 per person per year and £400 per person per year. So I would say that that's a very low amount and a very high amount. You know, if you were going to buy something like Workday, which is seen as, you know, one of the kind of leading but most expensive providers, depending on what scope you're buying, that's kind of 150 to 250 pounds per person per employee. So that might be, you know, a bit of a benchmark for people to take into account. So to summarize, before we look at our winner, you know, the reporting that we've seen really in the survey and in our conversations is, you know, is driven understandably by what the SRA asks for. Hopefully we've shown you some engagement metrics, you know, well-being, retention metrics that shouldn't be too much hard work to collect. Some of these questions might be one or two things or tools that are kind of quite cost effective. But bearing in mind that these should be collected to help you to resolve business problems or, you know, achieve your business goals. So we're going to send all of these slides to you, and we'll send you the recording and also the full report, which will have all of this stuff in it and more. Give us your feedback, because, you know, Beverly and I have put this together and we're hoping that it's been helpful, but it'd be really good to hear from you and see, you know, if that was what you were expecting. And then we have a winner to announce. So I'm sure some of you on the call were at the People in Law Awards ceremonies last year. Super fun, really uplifting way to celebrate all of the people-related successes that we've had in the legal sector. Last year there were comedians, Rob was wearing his tux, and obviously it was all from home. So I'm promised that this year's is going to be even better. It's on the 10th of June. And so let's find out who's won the free ticket. Beverly's had the task of randomly finding somebody at the same time. So who's our winner?
So I've got drum roll and picking a name out of my virtual hat. It is Tash Reeves from McFarland. So congratulations to Tash.
Congratulations, Tash. Thank you so much for filling out the survey. Well done, and we'll get that across to you. So if there are no other comments and questions, I'll just have a quick check. I will give you 2 minutes back. Look at that. Right on time. So thanks very much, everyone, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you. Bye.